Grace returned to her home on the 14th floor of New York's prestigious Biltmore Towers. Standing by her piano, she opened the lid and let her long, thin, and pale fingers lightly caress the keys. Feeling the smoothness of the ivory and the warmth of songs played and yet to be played, calling from the waves of the lines of her fingerprints. She tucked her long lacy brown dress under her legs as she slid onto the piano bench, placing her book, pen, and some wildflowers she had picked on top of the piano. She inhaled deeply, closed her eyes, and readied her foot on the pedal. As she exhaled, her shoulders moved toward the piano, her foot gently pressed the pedal, and her first note was played. As other notes joined in, her hands glided across the keys effortlessly, flying like feathers blowing in the wind across the sky. She played through the afternoon and into the night with her eyes closed until the rain and wind beat in rhythm with her opus and opened her double doors of stained glass that led out to her garden patio. The wind whipped her long golden brown hair about her powdery white face. A few strands strayed across her large thin nose and across her long eyelashes that began to flutter like butterfly wings flying home. The rain and sweat mingled on her brow and dripped on the black and white keys as she collapsed on the last chord. Grace awoke the next morning with the bright kiss of the sun on her forehead. She peeled her cheek off the keys, which had made slanted imprints on her face. Her fingers were raw, and a few spots of dry blood clotted around her nails. Her scent was unpleasant, and her apartment was in disarray from the storm that had whipped through her life. Leaves were scattered across the parquet floor. Chairs had been upended. Pictures of the past were blown over. Sheets of paper were stuck to walls, and a large puddle was on the floor where the glass French doors had flung open. She fixed herself a spot of tea and ran warm water over her hands to bring life back into them as she had done many mornings. The cleanup took most of the early morning. She nibbled on a scone as she righted what had gone wrong. Her last act of the morning was to close the glass doors that led out to her small garden patio. She had a plum tree, lemon tree, a pyracantha bush, a red rose bush, and a small vegetable garden which contained her 2 prized tomato plants. There was a small bench between the 2 trees and a sundial. She breathed deeply with the dawn and the freshness of the air after the good windy rain, when she noticed a fragment standing behind the plum tree. Fragments, those shadow keepers and watchers of time. Fragments had no real substance except as a reflection or a fleeting shadow. The fragments had found her again. As the sun cleared the horizon, dispelling the shadows in her small garden, the fragment disappeared and melted into the tree. She had lived at her present address for 3 decades without the bother of them. They usually found her out every 2 years, but the fragments had given her some peace for longer than she could dream possible. She had moved from place to place throughout the centuries and had found a way to elude the fragments without much movement or energy. But she was growing tired and did not have the will or desire to pick up her life again, even though she knew she must. She owned this flat and wanted for very little here. Now she would have to start over again, and soon, before the fragments were on her heels, wanting her story, wanting her life. She wasn't finished yet, but they wanted whatever magic or power they could grab from her. The fragments' numbers had diminished, but so had her kind. Damn them! They would suck the life out of her until they dissolved her soul, their sustenance, the fragment's reason for living. Grace slammed the door and pulled the drapes in an effort to forget the visage of her nemesis. She grabbed her notebook, glided to the park, alighted on a bench, and began to write in her book. In the days of the tribes, life was simpler. My memory is not as good as I would like in this area, but every day I remember more. The man stood in front of the cauldron as the steam puffed from the contents of the sweet-smelling bubbly. The man in the shiny indigo robes and sparkling conical hat made the cleansing gesture, breathing deeply and bringing the smoky steam towards him, then up to the heavens with the full length of his arms. Peace filled his soul and the universe. The stars spoke to him about the breath of life, to breathe in the pure energy of creation, hold it, and then let it go to another soul. In these days, some call this love, for lack of a better description, but is much more than this word. We were ghosts to the tribes at first. The tribes were frightened of us. We were so pale and white, and they were dark. We understood the spiritual gifts that connected us to the Creator, and how to reach out and travel amongst many planes of being. We knew the sciences and the arts and practiced everything through the breath of life. We did not completely understand the physical nature of our environment, but once the tribes were no longer afraid of us, we learned much from each other, but could never seem to master each other's domains fully. We only came out at night because the sun was harsh on our skin, but we learned about salves to protect ourselves and ventured forth in daylight hours more often. The day of the tribes was a magical time, full of wonder and purity of thought, word, and deed. All was one. Those who now remain have forgotten the magic that fills their blood. They ignore the magic when they begin to remember, because the magic frightens them and seems alien, but the magic is the most natural of human gifts. I think the magic is not acceptable in this world now because it cannot be empirically proven, only known, but it will be back. It will be back. Grace rested her hand and her memories and looked through the life at the park. A chipmunk nestled against her feet as a hummingbird alighted on her shoulder, and a small group of ants decided to crawl over the back of her hand in circles, a dance of a spiral expanding and contracting hypnotically. She looked for the Mara child. She needed to leave, but wanted to say goodbye to the Mara child and give her the energy and secret to continue the story of the life.